Dark Side of the Ring this week was devoted to the famous match between Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher from IWA Mid-South in 2005. A fantasy matchup for a lot of indie wrestling fans who wanted to see Joe, who was a brawler, but hardly a deathmatch guy, against Necro, who worked a much more sadistic, violent style. In an age now where we've seen far worse in death matches and Texas death matches, this felt less like a death match watching it and more like just a brutal fight between two guys who happened to be using whatever they could get their hands on around ringside. This was not about light tubes or staple guns or anything like that. No light tube was harmed in the making of this pro wrestling match. It's a memorable match to those who saw it. I was not one of those people until many years later, watching it on YouTube or Daily Motion or wherever it was that I saw it for the first time. The match clocks in at under 10 minutes, which had me wondering when they first announced that this was going to be one of the topics this season. Like, how are they going to get a 45-minute episode out of this? But what they did was they used it to also profile Necro Butcher, right? They gave us a little bit on Samoa Joe, but we kind of know who Samoa Joe is. But a lot of people may not know or remember who Necro Butcher is unless you were a big fan of his or that style of wrestling back then. And talked also about some of the childhood trauma that he suffered that colored a lot of what we saw from him years later in the ring. Colored it in red. It was a violent match. It was a bloody match. But there was nothing terribly gory about this particular match. I thought they did a really good job with this. I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. Among the names that they got for this to be interviewed were the two main characters, which you needed. You needed Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher. Joe is fucking great in this, but Joe is great in everything he's in. Even Twisted Metal, from what you guys tell me. Eddie Kingston was interviewed. AEW referee Bryce Remsburg, who officiated this match, he was interviewed. Madman Pondo, friend and sometimes tag team partner of Necro's. Dave Prazak, who did commentary for the match. How's this for a commentary team? Dave Prazak did commentary with Eddie Kingston and CM Punk for this match. And they interviewed Rob Naylor, who is a wrestling historian now, and he's a former Dragon Gate USA announcer. They didn't mention this, but he also worked as a creative assistant in Florida Championship Wrestling and then NXT from 2011 to 2013. He worked very closely with Dusty Rhodes. He was basically Dusty's right-hand man. And I think my favorite Rob Naylor story was Dusty had gotten a new dog one day, and he asked Rob to take the dog for a walk. Dusty had named the dog Ty Black. Well, Dusty was also a huge fan of Seth Rollins' work when he came into developmental, and Seth's name in Ring of Honor was Tyler Black. So he named his dog Ty Black as a nod to Seth Rollins. I always get a kick out of that story. When I first started watching Ring of Honor in 2006, Joe had already had that legendary run as Ring of Honor World Champion for, I think it was almost 650 days. It was almost 2 years. The first main event I ever saw live was Joe against Bryan Danielson against Kenta at the New Yorker Hotel for the Ring of Honor World title. The year before that, in that same venue, Joe had that legendary match with Kenta Kobashi. Like, Joe was the man. He was that dude. Necro Butcher, I was a lot less familiar with until he started popping up in ROH. Like, I knew him really from the feud with Ring of Honor and CZW that he was part of when they did that whole interpromotional war between the two companies. Same thing with the Kings of Wrestling, Chris Hero and Claudio. I believe when I first saw them in Ring of Honor, they were affiliated with CZW as part of that whole feud. But Necro had no regard whatsoever for his own body, and he developed a reputation for just taking these horrendous bumps on the indies and taking just so much punishment. This guy was wrestling on broken glass and thumbtacks and broken light tubes with bare feet. He didn't even have boots. Like, the elevator didn't go up to the top floor with this guy, if you know what I mean. Except years ago, who was it? I think it may have been Jim Cornette, mentioned that Necro had like a genius level IQ, right? I've heard that about Raven too, that Raven was like a Mensa member, but apparently Necro had a very high IQ. He was actually a very intelligent guy. And in the episode, they mentioned that he was a good student in school, but because of that, he got bullied a lot by the other kids. And he used to watch wrestling with his father until one day there was a house fire and his father died in the fire. He was burned up, according to Necro. So they had a closed casket at the funeral. I mean, this put the dark in Dark Side of the Ring. After that, no friends, no father to sit and watch wrestling with. He was all alone. And he had no one to hang out with. And I think that explains a lot when it comes to this man's penchant for abuse. He took a lot of it as a child, right? He was punched, he was kicked, said the kids gave him swirlies in the bathroom, but he had the mentality of don't sell it. Don't sell it. Don't let them know that it hurts me. Don't let them know that it bothers me. And he learned in wrestling, like he could take all kinds of physical abuse, more than most. And he always had the mindset of, you can't hurt me. Nothing you can do can hurt me. Well, I mean, I think Samoa Joe may have proved otherwise in this match. They didn't mention it here, but Necro actually served in the Army. They wanted him to re-enlist, and he had met some wrestlers during his time in service, and they gave him some training, and he decided, I'd much rather do this. I'd much rather wrestle than stay in the Army. And so that's what ultimately led him to making the jump to the ring. How we got to this match, was really, it was born out of the message boards online. This was a match that the fans really willed into existence. And Rob Naylor talked about posting back then on the old ROH message boards that he wanted to see Samoa Joe wrestle Necro Butcher. And he got flamed for it, right? Because the Ring of Honor fans, they thought that it was beneath Joe. Like, why would he stoop so low as to do a match with this, garbage wrestler? But for years, the belief was that the heat between Joe and Necro was very real. And it stemmed from an incident at a Chikara show. Chikara was a very family-friendly promotion with a lot of very over-the-top silly gimmicks that was run by Mike Quackenbush, one of the many casualties of the Speaking Out movement 6 years ago, after which he shut down Chikara. I don't even know what he's up to these days, nor do I care, but Necro and Madman Pondo, they were brought in for a match in Chikara in a tag team tournament against a pair of Ring of Honor students who were very green. Necro thought the kids were stinking out the joint, so he took matters into his own hands. And he and Pondo, they really started roughing him up. And they interviewed both students in the episode, and they admitted that they were both legitimately knocked out at different points during the match. And the story was that Joe had a hand in training those kids, and when word got back to him about what had happened and they were taken advantage of, he was furious. As it turns out, none of that was true. It's the work of wrestling fiction. Now, Joe did cut a promo on Necro after the incident at a show, calling him I think like a pilled up bully. And he said, Necro, the Necro Butcher is fucking dead. This was after Ian Rotten, the promoter for IWA Mid-South. He was looking for a big match to book for their show at the ECW arena. He had gotten Joe and Necro to agree to wrestle each other. When Joe cut that promo on Necro, he had never even seen the Chikara match. This match that supposedly infuriated him. He had never even seen it. All he knew was what he was told, which is that Necro had roughed up a couple of students. Joe had never even trained anybody a day in his life. He didn't have a hand in their training. Necro, though, he didn't know if the heat between them was real or not. And he wasn't very happy about some of the things that Joe said about him in that promo. And I'm sure, Ian Rotten was in his ear telling him things as promoters do to get him all riled up, for the match. But he didn't know what to make of Joe's real feelings about him. He was just happy to take the booking. But the absolute best part of the episode was listening to Samoa Joe reveal the real reason why he took the match. He said his then girlfriend, now wife, lived very close to Philadelphia. So he literally took the booking to get some ass. Amazing. The two of them had very different reasons for accepting this match, right? For Necro, it was to show that he was more than just a deathmatch guy, right? It was the chance to kind of elevate his stock and maybe even open himself up to getting booked in other places that might not have otherwise booked him. And for Joe, it was just another match and a good excuse for him to get some action with his girl. A totally valid reason to accept any booking, by the way. So imagine Joe's surprise when this thing blew up into something bigger than just another wrestling match. Like, he's talking about the day he got to the building, coming into the arena, and just the vibe. Everybody was like looking at him. They were all excited. And he's like, hey guys, like, for him, it was just another day at the office. It was just another fucking match. But everybody was like, this was so hyped up on the internet. It was so, like, everyone was so excited to see, what is this match going to look like? Joe is going to kill him. Maybe he'll shoot on him. Oh my God, this is going to be so great. One of the things I really liked about the episode is that, and they show the match. As they show the match and they kind of take us through the different parts and the different spots, we get the perspectives of all these different people. Joe is sitting in a room by himself. He's sitting on like bleachers in this room, watching the match projected onto this giant screen, or maybe it was a giant wall. Meanwhile, you got Eddie Kingston, he's sitting there geeking out, watching the match on a MacBook, like a 14-inch screen. And what followed was just a hard-hitting, brutal, bloody grudge match. It's not a death match. It's actually very tame compared to your typical death match, and most of the matches that Necro has had in his career, outside of all the head bumps that he took here. Those were horrifying. Necro had just flown back from Japan, 15 hours with a head wound. He flew home to West Virginia. He got in his truck. He made the 6-hour drive, or whatever it is, from West Virginia to Philadelphia to wrestle Joe. And then the wound opened up during their match, which is where all the blood came from. They fight into the crowd early in the match. Again, not a long match, less than 10 minutes long, but early in the match, they fight into the crowd, and Joe goes to deliver. If you've ever seen a Samoa Joe match, you see him do the snap power slam. He did it on the concrete floor here, but because there were so many drinks that had been spilled, there was like a wet spot on the floor. As he's executing this power slam, he slips, and he almost executed Necro Butcher in the process. He cracked the floor just hard with his skull, and he was definitely concussed. Had to be concussed. I don't see how he couldn't be concussed. You know, Bryce Remsburg says, "Oh, it's not something you're going to see on Monday Night Raw." Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. Not that I'm all that enchanted with Raw lately, but I also like my wrestlers to not crack their skulls on the concrete. If I have the choice between that or Raw, I'm going to watch Raw. I'll take my wrestlers without brain damage. Thank you very much. So then there was an even sicker spot where Joe executed Necro. I keep saying he executed Necro. It felt like maybe he was trying to execute this man. No, he had him on the apron, and he gave him, it was like an exploder off the apron to the floor. And again, Necro's head smacked the floor. There's no mats out there. His head smacked the floor with a sickening thud. He's like Mick Foley in that regard, where you watch him take these sickening bumps, and you watch with amazement as he just gets right back up to his feet, and he just keeps on going. I mean, I guess the closest thing today that I could compare it to is Darby Allin. Yeah, I would say Foley and Necro are a lot closer in terms of their look and their style, but you got Darby, compared to them, I mean, Darby is like a scrawny little teenager with face paint on. But he takes these insane bumps and a ridiculous amount of punishment. He just keeps getting back up from it somehow. Necro calls that suplex he took off the apron long-term storytelling. I call it long-term brain damage. He calls it long-term storytelling because in the Chikara match where he roughed up those students, he gave one of them a very similar suplex off the apron. And so they just, chalk it up to a happy accident because, they claim that Joe and Necro, they didn't go over any of these spots beforehand. It's just a happy accident that it worked out that way. Joe was at one point dishing out open hand palm strikes, and Necro, who is just, his face is just dripping blood. The blood is splattering into the crowd with every palm strike. And this was the point in the match where Joe said his girlfriend was there. His girlfriend was in attendance for the match. The one he took the booking so he could smash. She was in the crowd, and this was the point where she got up and left because he says she almost threw up. And she still married the guy. She's a keeper. The fact that she stayed with him after that and didn't run away, I think is it's a sign that you should be holding on to her for dear life. So Joe didn't feel like it would make sense for him to pin Necro or make him submit. So he just beat him senseless until he couldn't respond to the referee's 10 count. He tried to get up. He collapsed to the mat. Referee called the match off. And then when it was over, Necro was down selling for so long. Joe went over. He kind of gave him a little kick to the head, like almost like an Orange Cassidy kick to the head. And that just kind of woke up Necro and gave him a reason to fire up. And he knocked Joe out of the ring. It almost looked like Joe was running away from him because Necro went out after him. He had to be held back and Joe left. And Joe thought it was important that Necro end the night standing on his own 2 feet. And that really put Necro over. Really the whole match did. The way it was constructed, like, he's this tough son of a bitch who would not quit. Joe really put this guy over in a major way, even though Necro lost. It's one of those examples of winning by losing, right? Some of the biggest matches and moments in people's careers were ending up on the losing end. Steve Austin is the best example of this that I could think of against Bret Hart at WrestleMania. He lost, but he really won that night, right? That's the match that made him. Or maybe for the purposes of this match, the better comparison would be Mankind against The Undertaker inside Hell in a Cell. I mean, the man took an ungodly beating and he lost. People still talk about that match to this day. Not that Mick wasn't already like a main event player in that company beforehand, but it's like pre-cell and post-cell. It's like these 2 different phases of his career, of his life. And again, people are still doing little mini documentaries all these years later about that Hell in a Cell match. And like Foley that night, Necro actually came back out later in the show. Now, Mick didn't wrestle. He did come back out to take more bumps in the first blood match between Austin and Kane at the King of the Ring. Necro had another full-blown match to wrestle that night, which is nuts. I love the line that Necro used, though, in the episode. He said, Johnny Valentine used to say, I can't make people believe in wrestling, but I can make them believe in Johnny Valentine. And that was his mentality. I'm going to make the people believe in the Necro Butcher. Now, they talked about Necro later on being diagnosed with stage 3 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he was bedridden for about 9 months. The first 3 treatments didn't work. And they were about to tap out, but they did the 4th one, and the 4th one took. You just never know. So he beat cancer. He ended up back in the ring, and they didn't get into this, but he did wrestle again. He fractured his hip in 4 different places a couple of years ago while wrestling in Japan. And he was stuck in the hospital there for weeks and weeks in this tiny hospital where no one spoke English. Like, that's scary. It actually reminds me of when I hurt my knee in Colombia, and my friends, they rushed me to this tiny hospital at like 1 a.m. And we get there, and the first person I tried talking to doesn't speak English. And it's like, I'm bleeding all over the floor. Good times. At least in my case, I found people who did speak English, and they took good care of me. I can't complain. For Necro Butcher, I'm sure it was scary, laying there with a broken hip and not being able to speak to anybody and communicate with anybody. So, fractured hip, he had a total knee replacement, I know, a few years ago. The man has been through the ringer. But that's the price you pay, for doing what he does. You know what you're signing up for. You know what you're getting yourself into. This episode did not have the tragic ending that many of these have, but I do think you come away with a better understanding of how somebody like Necro could end up becoming this, like, deathmatch icon. Like, what drives someone to want to do that for a living? Their upbringing has a lot to do with it. It did for Necro. That much is clear. They bullied as a kid, then he ended up as a loner when his dad died. It definitely shaped him. So I enjoyed this one more than I thought I would. And this is cool. Vice commissioned 300 limited edition VHS copies of this Dark Side of the Ring episode, and they included the full match in there as well. 50 copies of which were signed by Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher. And they sold out very quickly. They're all gone now. I don't think they're making more of them, but if you got your hands on one, all you need is a VCR to play it. And if you're young enough to be asking, well, what the hell is a VCR? Go look it up. I'm going to be over here in the corner crying